Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. Thanks for watching again. So this is going to be a continuation of part 2 of my video series on Hobbes. You recall that part 1 was just introducing Hobbes and talking about his general philosophical worldview in terms of metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. And part 2 is about Hobbes' theory of human nature in the context of the discussion of Hobbes' development of political philosophy. So what I like to do is pick up where I left off last time, my last video, with the idea that Hobbes concludes with, in thinking about the state of nature being a state of war. And this idea is going to lead to the development of Hobbes' political philosophy, as we're going to see. So we saw that the state of nature has several important components. Some of those components involve thinking about human nature. So there's no common political power, so there's no political authority to rule over anybody. So the laws of nature aren't going to be externally binding. There's scarce resources. There's going to be constant competition for these resources. There's going to be equality. Human beings are mentally and physically equal. There's no such thing as moral equality for Hobbes. Okay, there's no intrinsic worth that human beings have. All worth is extrinsic that human beings have. Okay, and this factor is going to lead, serve as a motivation for battle with others. We're not going to trust each other, okay, as we compete for the resources. Everyone's going to be roughly equally good at getting those resources. We have rational foresight, remember, and we're free. Remember, the rational foresight idea is that we're going to be able to use our reason to predict the future and plan accordingly in our efforts to get the resources. So we're going to try to stockpile. We're going to try to seek advantages, to anticipate advantages, and be planning basically battles with others in order to get resources to survive. We're going to be free, remember, in the sense that everyone's going to have the right to everything. And we're going to be limitedly altruistic. That's just human nature, is that we tend to act for our own self-interest. Okay, we don't tend to act for the interests of others. That's very rare. It typically involves close family members, close friends. Okay, and in many cases, when we act for the sake of others, on Hobbes' view, we're really acting for our own interest, right? So our altruism sometimes is derivative, right, upon what's good for us. But setting all those aside now, those really 6 key components of a state of nature, Hobbes concludes with the claim that the state of nature is a state of war. Okay, it's going to be a miserable place for us to be in. So then, as you can imagine, there's going to be some overwhelming evidence or overwhelming reason for us to exit such a state to form a political society. Let's hold off on that for a moment. Hobbes' Leviathan, chapter 13. He says this. Let's read a couple passages. Hereby it's manifest that during the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, so that's state of nature. They are in that condition which is called war. State of nature sees the state of war. As is every man against every man, or every person, as is of every person, every person against every person. For war consisteth not in battle only, or in an act of fighting, but in attractive time, wherein the will to contend by battle is sufficiently known. In other words, when you're in a state of war, that could involve actual battle, but it can also involve preparing for battle, expecting battle, anticipating battle. All other times, Hobbes concludes a few lines down, is peace. He continues, whatsoever therefore is consequent to a time of war, state of nature is a state of war, where every person is enemy to every person. He said every man is enemy to every man. The same is consequent to the time wherein men live without other security than what their own strength and their own inventions shall furnish them withal, so they're in a state of nature. In such a condition there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor the use of commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no letters of the face of the earth, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no science, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society even, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. And here's the most famous passage from the whole Leviathan. And the life of man, the life of people, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. That state of nature is a brutal place to be. It's a state of war. And that, as I anticipated before I read these passages, provides Hobbes with all the reason he needs for claiming that we need to get out. Think about the natural law for a minute. What does it tell us to do? Promote generally our own good, and we do so by seeking peace. Seeking peace. Okay, a war-like situation is not good for us. Not good for me, it's not good for you, it's not good for anybody. So in order, right, to live up to my obligation for my own good, I need to seek peace. And how do I do so? The natural law tells us, in the second law of nature, what does it tell us? Make contracts with others in the way of peace. So that's the clue. When you make contracts with others in the way of peace, that's going to presuppose that there's some entity, some sovereign, who can enforce the contract or the contracts that are made. And that's a political society. So the natural law gives us the clue, right, to thinking about what we need to do to get out of saved nature. Okay? So we're obligated, okay, by the natural law, with this egoistic flavor in Hobbes, to get out of saved nature. So there's egoistic reasons, or reason, for getting out of saved nature. And the reason is basically this: state of war is terrible for the promotion of your own good. Political society offers you a much better chance. Saved nature, state of war. We're now out, and we're on our way to forming political society. We've got all the justification that we need. So now a bit more needs to be said. Okay, so we make contracts with others in the way of peace. So what does that mean? People are leaving the state of nature, they're forming a political society. And what establishes the political society, and ultimately for Hobbes, what justifies it, is going to be the fact that the people have agreed, that's a contract, an agreement, they've agreed to surrender their right to everything which they had in a state of nature, and to transfer the power that comes with having that right to the sovereign, to rule. That's what sometimes called an original agreement, an original contract that's made as people exit the state of nature to form a political society. And that's the relevant agreement there. So what establishes the political authority, what justifies the political authority, is going to be the consent of the governed. The consent of the governed. This is what's called a social contract theory of political authority, of political philosophy. Social contract theory, because it's a social contract that establishes and justifies the political authority had by the sovereign. Okay, so keep in mind, really, really important here, the contract is between the citizens, okay, that they're agreeing to be ruled by a sovereign in the contracts that they make. I mean, think about like a rudimentary contract system here. I won't hurt you if you don't hurt me. We agree to that? Good. The sovereign now gets to enforce that. Now I'm more secure because the sovereign can now protect me, because you've agreed, right, that the sovereign has the right to enforce the contracts. Okay? Of course, it's much more complicated, but that's the basic idea. The sovereign's going to ensure a kind of security to promote one's own good that's not there where? In a state of nature. Okay, come back to this point here. The contract is not between the citizens and the sovereign, according to Hobbes. There are some social contract theorists who reject Hobbes on this point, but according to Hobbes, the contract is not vertical in this way. It's not holding between the sovereign and the citizens. The sovereign is outside of the contracts. The reason for this is pretty straightforward. He developed some sophisticated arguments, but the idea behind the arguments is really simple. A sovereign is not sovereign unless it's truly sovereign. And if there's checks on the sovereign isn't truly sovereign. Whoever gets to enforce the checks on the sovereign, whoever gets to enforce the contracts with the sovereign, is truly sovereign. Okay, and that's not going to be the sovereign. It's going to be some other entity who's then the true sovereign. And for those of you who might be able to see ahead, there's a regress argument that would develop here, right? You end up with an infinite number of enforcers, right, on the checks on the sovereign, and that's a bad result according to Hobbes. Okay, so the power of the sovereign then is absolute. He's outside of the contract. The power is absolute. You then have, in a political society, as a citizen, according to Hobbes, no political right to self-preservation. You have a natural right to it, but you don't have a political right to it. That you give a sovereign absolute authority, that means they can do whatever they want. Think about what absolute power means. So you have, as it were, no political right to self-preservation, no political right to revolution. That doesn't mean that a revolution can't occur, you just have no political right to it. Okay, a sufficient number or critical mass of people who feel like they're in a worse situation than a state of nature even, right? Or that they're in a situation that is on a par with a state of nature because they're not feeling secure, they're not given the opportunity to promote their own good. Of course, they can come together and rebel, but that starts a civil war, and now we got a state of nature again. Okay, so crucial you keep in mind, right, that aspect of Hobbes's social contract theory. So absolute authority is going to be had by the sovereign. Now, what kind of government does Hobbes advocate? There's monarchy, there's oligarchy, and there's democracy. We know he's a royalist, so he's going to advocate for the monarchy. What's the key argument he gives? He gives several, but the key one that we'll lock in on is this. Remember the state of war? Remember the state of nature? State of nature is a state of war, miserable state to be in. You want to form a government that is the least likely to collapse into a state of nature, which is a state of war. That's what you want. And a monarchy is least likely. Why? Because with the monarchy, there is less likelihood of factions forming. And when factions form in society, there's greater likelihood that the society degenerate into a civil war and society become a state of nature, which is a state of war. So Hobbes' social contract theory ends up arguing for, not on utopian grounds, but on probabilistic, practical grounds, really, to avoid a state of nature, right? An absolute monarchy. Defense of the royalist position, ultimately. Okay? So, we talked about Hobbes' theory of the state of nature. It includes very important features of his theory of human nature. Okay? We saw overall the key features of human nature involving the fact that we're purely material, our soul is purely material, right? That we're mentally and physically equal in a state of nature, that we're free, right? That we have rational foresight, and that we have limited altruism, right, when we act. Okay? And these are crucial aspects in thinking about how the state of nature ends up being a state of war, and that gives us all the reason, on Hobbes' view, to get out, to form a political society. And so the political society is going to end up being an absolute monarchy. So he defends the royalist position in his lifetime. That's one of the reasons why it wasn't safe, right, for Hobbes to be in England when the parliamentarian side gained ascendancy and gained power. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. This concludes my discussion of Hobbes. More soon. Thanks for watching.